In the race for critical minerals, railways are becoming a strategic asset, and we're seeing countries like China stepping up their investments. Here now to talk about all of this is Matthew Hill. He is a Bloomberg News Africa correspondent who's been covering mining in Indaba for quite some time. We've been talking quite extensively across Bloomberg about just the commodity boom that we are seeing, but really what we're seeing from gold. But from your vantage point, you are seeing an increasing focus on copper. Can you talk about really what the dialogue and the rhetoric has been over this mining in Indaba as it pertains to that metal?
We are seeing an increasing clamor for copper from the world's developed economies, as well as some more developing economies, and a growing realization that the world is going to need to secure much more copper for things like building AI data centers, which are extremely heavy on electricity use. And anywhere you find growing use of electricity, you're going to find growing use of copper. And in a world that's using much more copper, we need to find where that copper is. And in Central Africa, you've got Zambia and Congo, which sit in a pretty unique position of being one part of the world where copper production has been increasing rapidly and will continue to do so in the coming years. The problem with that is the Central African copper belt is literally in the middle of Africa, a continent which has some of the world's most poorly developed logistics.
Which is where infrastructure has made its way quite extensively, I think, throughout these discussions with mining executives and even government, where, because you have covered extensively about some of the infrastructure throughout the Southern African continent, where are we at in terms of getting these metals from the ground then to the export market?
That's such an important point, and this is where geopolitics have really come to the fore. We've seen the US and the EU backing a railway project coming out of the Central African copper belt from southern Congo to an Angolan port, an Atlantic port on the western side of the African continent called Lobito. They've pledged hundreds of millions of dollars to refurbish an existing railway there and then connect it to the south, into Zambia, where there is also a growing demand for logistics into and out of the Zambian copper belt. On the other hand, we've got China, a consortium of Chinese investors led by a state-owned company that is now spending nearly $1.4 billion on refurbishing an existing railway line that was built in the 1970s during the Mao era that connects the Zambian copper belt to the Dar es Salaam port in Tanzania to the east of Zambia, which has actually emerged as now the most used port for the Congolese and Zambian copper mines. So you essentially see this race from the West, the EU and the US, to develop the Western rail corridor, the Lobito corridor, and now China to refurbish the Eastern Tazara railway corridor.
I mean, and people talk so much about how it's not a race, it's not a competition, but I think you just mapped out sort of in what sense it sort of is. But then there's also the added fact that a lot of these African governments like Zambia and the President Hichilema trying to figure out how they fit into it, right? What did we hear from the president?
Exactly. So President Hichilema spoke this week in his keynote and to us journalists about the importance of both of these projects. I know a lot of politicians have tried to characterize these two separate projects as being complementary and crisscrossing, forming a corridor that will crisscross the entire African continent for the first time. That can also benefit farmers, providing much faster, more efficient and cheaper logistics for getting their crops to markets around the world. But I mean, at the end of the day, it is a power play between the West and China in accessing these critical minerals. That's the core of this.